Picture this: the sun dips below the horizon, and the world plunges into almost total darkness. No electricity, no police, no secure locks, just the uncertainty of the night. For families living in the Middle Ages, surviving until morning was never guaranteed. So, how did medieval people protect themselves, their homes, and their loved ones when danger lurked in every shadow? Tonight, we open the wooden door to history and step into a medieval household at night. The fear of the night in medieval Europe. In the medieval imagination, night was a time of fear and mystery. It wasn't just about the lack of light, it was about what the darkness concealed. By day, villages and towns were bustling, but at night, they became eerie and silent. To most medieval families, night carried multiple threats. Thieves and bandits. With no police force in the modern sense, law enforcement was limited. A thief could break into a house under the cover of darkness and steal food, tools, or money. Wild animals. In rural areas, wolves, wild boars, and even bears prowled forests and farmlands. Families with livestock feared night raids on their animals. Enemy raiders. In border regions or during wartime, Viking raiders or mercenary groups could strike villages at night. Fires. Homes were built of wood, straw, and wattle and daub. A small cooking fire left unattended could destroy an entire village. A superstition and the supernatural. Many people believed witches, demons, and restless spirits prowled after dark. Night was seen not just as physically dangerous, but spiritually threatening. In short, nightfall transformed the medieval world into a place of uncertainty, where both real and imagined dangers blurred together. Architecture as defense. One of the most basic ways families protected themselves was through the design of their homes. Doors. The front door was the first line of defense. Typically made from thick oak planks, sometimes reinforced with iron bands, doors were locked at night with wooden bars placed into brackets or with large iron keys, for wealthier households. In poorer homes, a heavy wooden beam might be pushed across the door from the inside. Windows. Most peasant homes didn't have glass. Instead, they used small openings covered by wooden shutters. These were latched shut at night to block intruders and the cold. Wealthier homes used lattices of iron or horn panels to cover windows. Upper floors. Some houses in Northern Europe had entrances on the upper floor, accessed by a ladder. At night, families pulled the ladder inside, leaving no external access point. Walls and courtyards. Manor houses and urban homes often had boundary walls, gates, or small courtyards. These served as an extra layer of defense against intruders. In cities, wealthier homes sometimes had iron spikes on walls or barred gates, while peasants relied more on sturdy construction and communal vigilance. Curfews and community watch. Night was not just a private concern, it was a public one. Many towns and villages developed systems to regulate nighttime behavior. Curfew laws. By the 11th century, curfew bells rang in towns across Europe. At the sound, families were required to extinguish fires and settle indoors. The word curfew comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. This law was as much about fire prevention as it was about security. Night watchmen. Some towns hired watchmen who patrolled streets after dark. They carried lanterns, staffs, or even swords. Their job was to catch thieves, ensure fires were out, and enforce curfew laws. Community cooperation. In small villages, families depended on neighbors for protection. People looked out for suspicious behavior, and households often shared guard duties when danger was expected, such as during war or harvest times when food stores were most vulnerable. This community approach created a kind of medieval neighborhood watch, though one armed with pitchforks and torches rather than cell phones. Life inside. How families secured their homes. Once indoors, families created a fortress out of the simplest materials available. Securing the door, families placed benches, barrels, or heavy furniture against doors as extra barricades. In times of fear, multiple layers of defense were stacked in front of entrances. Guard animals. Dogs were the most common household guardians. Trained to bark at strangers, they served as an early warning system. In rural areas, geese were surprisingly effective. They honked loudly at disturbances and were sometimes used to guard farmyards. Weapons at hand. Men kept spears, axes, or swords nearby. Even peasants had knives, farming tools, or bows within reach. Sleeping in the same room meant that if danger struck, the family could respond together. Sleeping arrangements. Unlike today, where rooms are divided, medieval families often slept communally in one large room. This made it easier to defend themselves if intruders broke in. The spiritual side of protection. In the medieval mindset, danger wasn't only physical, it was also spiritual. Families turned to faith for protection during the vulnerable hours of the night. Night prayers. Before bed, many households recited prayers, asking God, the Virgin Mary, or local saints to protect them from thieves, fire, and demons. Protective charms, some hung crosses, religious medals, or charms above doors and windows. Superstitious families used herbs like garlic or rowan branches to ward off evil spirits. Church bells. In some towns, church bells rang periodically at night to remind people of prayer, and also to assure them that watchmen were still awake. Spiritual security was deeply intertwined with physical security. Belief gave families peace of mind when the world outside was dark and threatening. The village as a shield. For peasants, collective living was one of the best forms of defense. In small villages, homes were clustered close together, often around a central church or manor. This proximity meant that if one home was attacked, neighbors could rush to help. Fires, too, were fought communally. If a blaze broke out in one house, everyone would bring water, sand, or blankets to prevent it from spreading. At night, families kept buckets of water and sand ready, knowing a spark could mean disaster. The night in times of war. Periods of conflict made nighttime security even more important. For example, during the Viking raids in the 9th and 10th centuries, coastal villages in England and France often built wooden palisades or watchtowers. In the Hundred Years' War, 1337 to 1453, towns in northern France fortified walls and gates, locking them at sunset. Families behind these walls felt safer, but those in rural cottages were far more exposed. In border regions between kingdoms, raids could happen at any time. Families sometimes dug ditches or trenches around homes to deter attackers. As darkness fell, medieval families transformed their simple homes into fortresses. From thick doors and barred shutters to community curfews and watchmen, every layer of defense was designed to keep danger at bay. Yet, the night was far from conquered. In Part 2, we'll explore even more fascinating, and sometimes surprising, ways medieval people guarded their households, from guard geese to moats, and discover how many of these methods still survive today. Guard animals, the first medieval security systems. When we think of medieval defense, our minds often go to knights in armor or towering castles. But for ordinary families, the first line of defense was often animals. Dogs, trained to bark at intruders, dogs were by far the most common protectors. Large breeds like mastiffs were kept by nobles, while farmers relied on smaller but equally noisy village dogs. A barking dog alerted the household before danger reached the door. The geese, surprisingly, geese were considered excellent guards. Their sharp eyesight, loud honking, and aggressive behavior made them difficult to sneak past. Ancient Rome had once credited geese with saving the city from invaders, and the tradition carried into medieval Europe. Roosters, though not guard animals in the modern sense, roosters crowed at unusual times when disturbed. A sudden midnight crow could wake a household. Cats weren't guard animals, but they kept rodents at bay. Protecting food stores from rats and mice was critical to a family's survival, especially in winter. Families treated these animals as essential members of household defense. Fire prevention and nighttime vigilance. Beyond intruders, fire was the greatest enemy of the medieval night. One spark from a hearth could wipe out an entire street. Families used several methods to prevent disaster. Couvre-feu rituals. At curfew, families covered fires with ash or placed an iron lid, a couvre-feu, over the embers. This prevented sparks from escaping but allowed coals to smolder until morning. Buckets of water and sand, kept near hearths, these were the fire extinguishers of the Middle Ages. Some villages required every household to keep them ready. Fire watches. In larger towns, citizens sometimes took turns patrolling at night specifically to spot fires. Church towers provided vantage points for fire lookouts. The fight against fire became an important part of nighttime safety, blending community responsibility with household vigilance. Locks, bolts, and ingenious barriers. While many poor peasants had only wooden bars to secure doors, medieval technology developed steadily. Iron padlocks. By the 12th century, blacksmiths crafted padlocks, though these were expensive and used mainly by wealthier families. Door beams. Heavy horizontal beams were slid into stone brackets on either side of a doorframe, turning the door into an immovable barrier. Drawbars and drop bolts. Simpler homes used wooden bolts dropped into slots to secure doors. Hidden entrances. Some merchant homes in cities had hidden back doors or trapdoors into cellars. At night, these were barricaded tightly. These simple but effective designs foreshadowed the locks and bolts we still use today. Village defenses, moats, walls, and gates. Though castles dominate our imagination, even ordinary villages adopted defensive measures. Moats and ditches. Wealthier manors or towns dug ditches around settlements. At night, wooden bridges were pulled up or gates locked. Stone walls. By the High Middle Ages, 12th to 14th centuries, many towns had defensive walls. Gates were closed and barred after sunset, locking families inside. Watchtowers, villages at risk of raids sometimes built wooden towers. Watchmen with horns or bells sounded alarms if danger approached. For rural cottages without walls, clustering together provided the best protection. Isolated homes were considered highly vulnerable. Superstition and magical protection. The medieval night was as much about superstition as it was about practical security. Families took unusual steps to ward off evil. Charms and talismans, iron objects, like knives or horseshoes, were placed above doors to ward off witches or demons. Herbs, garlic, rosemary, and rowan branches were thought to repel spirits. Some families hung these above doorways. Religious icons, crucifixes, saintly relics, or blessed candles were common safeguards. Many believed they could physically protect a house from harm. Night prayers, families recited specific prayers before bed, such as invoking Psalm 91, which promises God's protection against terrors of the night. Though we may view these practices as superstition, they gave medieval families a sense of security in a world where danger was everywhere. The role of social hierarchy in protection. How families protected themselves often depended on social status. Peasants relied mostly on sturdy construction, dogs, and communal protection. They lived in simple one-room homes, making defense a family effort. Townsfolk, merchants and craftsmen often lived above their shops. At night, shutters were locked, and shutters sometimes doubled as shop security. Urban families benefited from curfews and night patrols. A nobility, wealthy lords lived in fortified manors or castles. At night, gates were locked, drawbridges raised, and guards posted. Entire garrisons ensured security, something peasants could only dream of. This stark difference shows how class shaped not only lifestyle but also safety at night. Nighttime routines, how families prepared for sleep. The process of securing a medieval home was almost ritualistic. 1. The fire was smothered with ash or covered with iron. 2. Doors were barred and bolted, with furniture sometimes dragged across them. 3. Shutters were latched shut to keep out intruders and cold drafts. 4. Guard animals were brought closer, dogs tied near doors, geese locked in yards. 5. Weapons were placed nearby for quick access. 6. Families said prayers or blessings for protection. 7. Everyone lay down in a shared room, often on straw mattresses or benches around the central hearth. This nightly ritual reinforced the fragile line between safety and danger. Cases of intrusion. What happened if security failed? Historical records and chronicles give us glimpses of what happened when homes were breached at night. In 14th century England, court rolls describe thieves breaking into cottages to steal chickens, bread, or tools. In France, some peasant families reported wolves entering barns at night and killing livestock, leading to wolf hunts organized by villages. In towns, burglars sometimes broke in through roofs, lifting thatch or shingles. Families responded by reinforcing roof joints at night. These accounts show that no defense was foolproof, but the effort often meant the difference between survival and ruin. Lessons that still apply today. Remarkably, many medieval methods still echo in our modern homes. Locks and bolts. Today's deadbolts are descendants of medieval door beams and iron locks. Neighborhood watch. Community-based safety mirrors the collective vigilance of medieval villages. Guard dogs, still used worldwide as household protectors. Fire prevention. Keeping extinguishers nearby is not so different from medieval water buckets. The blend of practical defense, community cooperation, and spiritual belief made medieval families surprisingly resilient against nighttime threats. So, how did medieval families protect their houses at night? Through a mix of practical defenses, bolts, shutters, animals, and walls, combined with faith, superstition, and community. They may not have had cameras or alarm systems, but their resourcefulness ensured survival in a world of constant danger. And perhaps, their lessons still remind us that even today, safety begins at home.